The block party is a really great, very sweet episode of The Middle. This is the 5th episode of the first season. It's directed by Ken Whittingham, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I talk about what happens. Sometimes I go through things chronologically, sometimes I will discuss each part of the narrative in turn, and that's how I'm going to do it with this one for the most part, but towards the end, everything kind of comes together. It starts off immediately establishing the fact that it is autumn or fall, and every year they have an annual block party, and that's what the episode is building up to. The part of the episode that focuses on Sue is very brief. Sue is trying out for Ball Girl, and I'll be honest, I didn't know what was going on when she kept asking Frankie to throw the ball for her. Did not occur to me that she was trying out for Ball Girl. She gets hit in the face with a tennis racket, and it's another episode where things don't go well for Sue, but it's definitely a small part of the episode. Part of the episode actually focuses on Axel, which kind of feels like about time, as up until this point it's mostly been about Sue, a little bit about Brick. It's nice to actually shift the focus to Axel for a bit, and he's in his phase where everything is lame, but he asks Frankie if she's coming to the Booster Club, and I had absolutely no idea what that was. I googled it, turns out it's some kind of event that parents hold to support or morally boost people who are in, for example, sports teams. I'm probably not explaining it very well. We see her decorating a locker and throwing things at it. And I think this is the first time we meet Nancy Donahue. I could be wrong, I might be misremembering it, but I'm pretty sure this is the first time the character's been in it. And I don't think she was mentioned by name either, but either way, that's definitely pretty cool. All of the sports players are giving their jerseys to their mothers, and Frankie thinks that Axel is about to do the same, and he throws it over her head to a girl behind her, a girl called Sophie. I feel like just throwing it to somebody else would have hurt, but the fact that it went over her head must have really been a very awkward situation. It turns out that Sophie didn't even like Axel, so it was a waste of a jersey, and we'll come back to the jersey towards the end of the discussion when we come to the block party. We then have the bit that I think was the most interesting, and I think this is largely because I relate to Brick in a lot of ways. So for me, I connect with Brick more as a character, and I always find the stories that revolve around him to be really fascinating. And he recently had to take a test, and the school wants to speak to Frankie and Mike, and they basically concluded from the test, Brick has difficulty making friends. You don't say. And Mike points out, and I think this is really important, Mike points out that Brick is the happiest kid they know. And I think that that's really important, because just because somebody appears to have difficulties, such as with Brick not really being able to make friends, it doesn't mean they're unhappy. Now, I do think something needs to be done about that at some point, because when Brick becomes an adult and grows up, he's not going to have those social skills that pretty much every other child learns when they're younger. So I'm not saying that they shouldn't do anything about it, but I do think it's important to remember that what some people might think of as a problem, it might not actually be negatively affecting another person. And I think that that's definitely really important and something that's worth remembering. We then get a montage of clips of Brick on different playdates. Really, if you connect with Brick as a character, I think those playdates will definitely be something that really stand out to you as being painfully relatable. When I was about Brick's age, if I went to the park, I would not play on the apparatus if there were any other kids there. Not because I thought I wanted the park all to myself, but because I hated being around these other children. If I didn't know them, if they were my friends or whatever, that's different. But if there was another child at the park, for example on the climbing frame, I wouldn't go anywhere near it. So definitely a strong element of me relates to Brick, and I found that to be really brilliant. Mike asks him what sport he likes, because he figured getting him involved in sports is a good way to get him to make friends. I think that's a brilliant idea. I think encouraging a child who has difficulty socializing to take part in an activity is really great. I feel like sports maybe wasn't the best option. I'm sure that the school would have had other extracurriculars that Brick could have taken part in, but nevertheless, Mike asks him, and Brick very easily volunteers basketball, and we do find out why, but not immediately. We get to see Brick, well, I was going to say playing basketball. We get to see Brick on the basketball court, and he pulls little packets out of his short pockets, and he reveals that these are his security condiments. These little ketchup packets help to soothe him. Whatever makes him happy. we then do find out that the reason he picked basketball is because it has 3 syllables and he likes words with 3 syllables. And then we have the bits where things get a lot more emotional. Mike is working on the lawnmower in the garage because they have this lawnmower race at the block party. And he's not, I don't want to say he's given up on Brick, but he has decided to distance himself from the situation, which it hurts a little bit to see him basically, in the moment at least, just giving up on Brick and walking away because Brick didn't conform to the ideal and he just did what he wanted rather than what Mike thought he should be doing. And it is kind of painful to see that happening, but the way things develop after that point are really great because Brick goes to see Mike in the garage, asks him if he needs any help, and Mike says no, and immediately I thought that's the wrong answer. If your child, particularly a child who has difficulty socialising, comes to you and offers to interact with you and engage in you, don't say no, unless you're doing something dangerous. And I don't think Mike was. I'm sure there were tasks. Well, there were tasks. But I feel like even when you're working on a lawnmower, there is something a child of Brick's age can do. Even if it's just passing you the tools, don't ever say no, unless it's a dangerous situation. And thankfully, this didn't become a problem because Brick pointed out that there was something wrong with the mower. And we learned that Brick read the user manual or the instructions and memorised it. And Mike realised that Brick could actually be a help. And that's another lesson there. The fact that Mike immediately said, no, I don't need your help. He didn't give his son a chance to show his value. And I think that there's a strong lesson there that you should never underestimate. Obviously, a much younger child shouldn't be around a lawnmower and shouldn't be handling tools and things. But Mike didn't give Brick a chance to show what he could bring to the situation. He immediately just rejected his offer. And I think that there's a really important message there that just because your child is weird by society's standards, it doesn't mean they can't help. It doesn't mean they can't be useful. And it doesn't mean you shouldn't want to spend time around them. And that's exactly what I was getting from Mike. But thankfully he learned quite quickly that actually that's not the case. And then he was showing Brick off at the block party, which was very sweet. And Brick seemed happy enough to share some of the information he learned. And I think the block party is brilliantly filmed. I think we get a really good sense of the community and the space. And there's a lot of attention to detail. We have the tables with food and the banners and everything. It looks brilliant. Very, very well done. Frankie actually confronts Sophie at the block party, Sophie being the girl to whom Axel threw his jersey, and she realises that Sophie gave the jersey back to Axel, and then Axel reveals he gave it to somebody else. And I didn't see this coming. I couldn't remember. I don't remember this episode very well at all from when I watched it, or when I used to binge watch the show back in the day. And I didn't remember what happened, and I did not see it coming. And I got really emotional because Frankie goes off on one at Axel, saying, I'm your mother, how could you give your jersey to some random girl? And the next thing we know, Sue walks into the frame wearing Axel's jersey. And it's so beautiful. And I was already kind of emotional with what happened with Brick and how there was a turning point with Mike welcoming his son into the activity and then showing him off with pride, which I'm assuming is something Brick has never experienced up until this point. And it was just so moving and so beautiful and very, very well done. And then at the very, very end, Brick walks up to Mike, who was on the lawnmower in the middle of the race, and says, can you take me to the bookstore now? You said we could go to the book signing. And what I will say is they didn't need to cut back to the basketball game. It cut back to the basketball game to show us Brick asking Mike if he'd take him to the book signing at the weekend. But we saw that. We saw that already several minutes ago. So I don't think they needed to do that. My memory is not so bad that I didn't remember it from a couple of minutes ago. So that felt like an unnecessary edit. But other than that, it was a beautiful ending where Mike initially says, no, I'm in the middle of a race. Brick walks off, kind of hurt by this. And there are two thoughts here. One, Mike shouldn't have forgotten about it. Or at least he shouldn't have immediately said no, because he did say to Brick that he would take him, so he shouldn't go back on his word. But I think the biggest takeaway is that you shouldn't just say yes when your son asks you to do something if you're not really listening. I don't think Mike was really listening to Brick when Brick initially asked him to take him to the book signing. So for me, I think the biggest lesson that people can learn from that is if your child is talking to you, listen to them. And if you're not listening properly, don't agree to something without fully comprehending the situation. Otherwise, they might stop you mid-lawnmower race and ask you to keep your promise. Mike, to his credit, realises that Brick is hurt by what was done, or I guess not done, and he drives the lawnmower over to him, scoops him up, and off they go. And then we have that beautiful shot of Frankie, Sue and Axel walking into frame and towards the camera as Mike and Brick drive off, and it's stunning. I find this to be a really emotional episode because of Brick and because of some insights we get into his personality and his, again, by society standards, odd behaviour. If you can relate to Brick, I think you'll find this to be a really moving, emotional episode, and I certainly did. And I really thoroughly enjoyed it. I think the block party is a pretty fantastic episode.